Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and I'm coming to you here today on another Storytime Thursday to read to you chapter 11 of my first book, The Shadow of the Past, the chapter entitled The Flight. Yes, I know I missed my usual videos earlier this week. Still working on getting my schedule and stuff like that organized and worked out. So thank you for bearing with me. And as I always, I would appreciate if you were to like, share, subscribe, get notifications whenever I post a new video. All that stuff would be wonderful. As well as check out my socials in my book, all that linked down below. But here we have chapter 11, The Flight. The hours just before dawn were the closest Garudar ever came to being a peaceful and calm city. They should have been, at any rate. Three figures, one noticeably shorter than the others, all in dark cloaks, broke the silence as they came pelting down the street of stonemasons at a dead sprint. They took cover behind a cart in front of one of the larger workshops to catch their breaths. There was a moment before any of them spoke, as they were all listening to the shouts that were being raised a few streets over, where they had just come from. "I warned you," hissed the tallest, who did not seem as out of breath. "I said that I was not practiced in the making of illusions, and even if I was, I did not have time to weave such a complex spell properly." "Oh, so it is my fault that the soldiers, standing guard outside, started raising alarms when we were barely inside the mansion because your illusions couldn't fool a couple of tired soldiers," snarled the shortest, clearly the most out of breath from having to keep up with his longer legged companions. "Also, who was it that decided to fight Magister Horvath when he attacked rather than simply incapacitating him?" The third companion shifted position from the crouch she was in so that her back was against the cart so she could breathe easier. "That was me. And I know I could have incapacitated, but when he came at me with that sword, I guess my fighting instincts just took over. Anyway, I thought you said that there was no mechanical contraption which you couldn't figure out." The second companion snapped and retorted, still quite out of breath. "Once we found the inside, found the compartment, I had no trouble getting into it. It was finding it that was the problem." "Well, at least we got what we came for, and it's a good thing, too, because the death of Magister Harvath at the hands of Lady Myra would have ended her father's reign as Duke faster than whatever Durton was planning had we not found it," pointed out the tall one, clearly hoping to calm his companions down. "You are quite right there, Val'inar. All that remains is to get these letters back to my father's mansion," stated Lady Myra. "I've just about got my breath back. We should start moving again soon. They'll be after us." "Val'inar?" The tallest of the three's face had suddenly contorted into deep concentration, and just as Myra addressed him, Val'inar rose to his feet and turned with a speed that startled Myra, and from his suddenly outstretched hands there jumped a blast of lightning that seemed to be in the shape of a spear. It almost instantly connected with its target on one of the adjacent roofs. Myra saw within the flash of the impact a man wearing the tabard of a Union soldier with his bow drawn to fire. As her eyes adjusted back to seeing in darkness, Myra realized that there were several more archers on the roof, and the once distant sounds of shouting had stopped and had been replaced by the sound of boots running across the pavement. And to Myra's rising worry, the sounds were coming from all around him. Val'inar was still standing stock still, observing their surroundings, and said in a hurried whisper, "That, I am afraid, looks to be easier said than done. When I tell you, make a run for the alley to our right." Almost as soon as he said this, Myra heard the twang of several bows being loosed at once, and almost as soon as the sound was heard, 5 quick flares of the arrows disintegrating in fire could be seen just a few yards from where they were. "Run!" The three companions broke into a fast run for the alley as another round of twangs was heard, this time immediately followed by the clatter of arrows striking the cobbles of where they had been but a moment previously. 2 soldiers were waiting for them halfway down the alley. As they began to move towards the companions, the shortest raised his hand, and with his long fingers traced a simple rune in the air. A blast of flame threw the left soldier into the wall of the alley, where he crumpled to the ground, badly burned. Myra went barreling into the other one before he could raise his spear, slamming him into the opposite wall just as his companion was falling. With a skillful twist, Myra disarmed her opponent, and in an elegant twirl, the butt of the spear cracked onto the exposed back of the soldier's left knee, sending him sprawling onto his back. As the twirl brought the spear point around, it was plunged into the man's neck. As this was happening, several more arrows were incinerated behind them just before finding their targets. As half a dozen other soldiers came sprinting into the alley after them, the three companions resumed their run through the alley. Myra, duck! Shouted Urgar just as she exited the alley onto the street that lay beyond. She immediately threw herself at the ground and did a neat roll. Even with this quick reaction, Myra could feel the heat of the fireballs that had suddenly torn through the air where her head had just been. The four mages wearing the eyes of the Union sent their next wave of fireballs at Urgar and Val'inar, who emerged from the alley immediately after Myra, unheeding of the damage the first wave had done to the butcher's shop, which had just been set ablaze. Urgar was ready for them, however, and he was already making the necessary runes with his hands. Before the fireballs had gotten halfway to their target, they suddenly coalesced into one large fireball and flew back at the mages, who just barely dove out of the way as the center of the street they had just been standing in erupted in a towering bonfire. Simultaneously, Val'inar waved a hand at the raging flames within the butcher's shop, quenching the fire. As an afterthought, he momentarily turned his gaze towards the results of his diminutive companion's counterspell, and the bonfire split itself into four serpents made wholly of fire, which took off after the mages, who were in various stages of picking themselves up and preparing another attack. Val'inar, Urgar, look out behind you, shouted Myra, seeing the soldiers emerging from the alley. With another fast gesture, the nearest fire serpent, which had been by good fortune made quick work of its target, snaked in front of the soldiers and became a wall of flames. This did not deter one of the soldiers, however, who jumped through the flames at Val'inar. The elf easily sidestepped the soldier's erratic blow, and as he did so, he grabbed the hold of the wrist of the soldier's sword hand and twisted the sword from it as he delivered a blow to the man's head, which rendered him unconscious. As more soldiers approached from both ends of the street, Val'inar stooped quickly to pick up the sword the man had dropped before leading his companions down another alley, heading, he hoped, in the direction of the mansion of the Duke. By this point, the commotion had drawn the attention of those that lived in the neighborhood, who stared in amazement at the charred mages, and a few of whom hurried into the butcher's shop to see if there were any smoldering embers that might reignite the fire. The Union soldiers paid these citizens no heed, shoving any aside that got in their way as they pursued their quarry down the alley. The three companions were shocked to see several groups of Union soldiers moving in from the other side in the next street they were in. In here, cried Myra to her companions as she led them into a large building that was to their right as they exited onto the street. The building was well appointed, and the room they entered was of large size and completely empty. However, they barely had time to survey their surroundings before the first three soldiers charged into the building after them. Myra and Val'inar moved to engage, and Urgar, drawing the knife he kept on his person, moved to help them, but he once more sensed the nearby manipulation of the area of fire, and he quickly countered the spells, unraveling the currents of air faster than they could be woven. The next several minutes saw a stream of soldiers charging through the door as they arrived on the scene. The citizens of Gyrodar might have found the contest of skill in weaving spells between the Union mages and Urgar almost as fascinating as the physical duel, if the spells were not making the streets smoke and smolder dangerously. There was a lull in attacks after several minutes, which gave the companions enough time to catch their breath and take stock of the situation. Urgar had seemingly bested the mages so far as he could sense, but the effort had drained him. Nearly a score of Union soldiers lay dead, wounded, or otherwise incapacitated around the room. Myra had an obvious bruise developing on her cheek from a punch that had almost blindsided her, and a rather large gash on her right arm. Not to mention she was clearly beginning to grow weary as well. Val'inar was unharmed, but his clothing was cut and torn in several places, revealing a number of near misses. Val'inar took the lull in combat to put out the fires that were beginning to spring up along the street outside, and after a moment's concentration, he even summoned a brief shower of rain to ensure that nothing was left smoldering. There were clearly still men outside, and judging by the gruff shouting which they heard someone in command had arrived and was organizing the soldiers for a proper assault. When the soldiers did finally re enter the building, they did so with a great air of confidence, and at their head was a tall and stern man who was in heavy plate armor with a long cloak of deep, rich purple, on which was the watching eye of the Union. He had black hair flecked with much gray, and he wore a thick mustache of the same salt and pepper coloring. He did not seem to be particularly muscular, but was undoubtedly powerful given the ease with which he moved in his heavy armor. "You have stolen something from us, returning willingly, and your lives may yet be spared," growled Commander Bivare in his deep and confident voice. "I assure you I seek no quarrel with you over the death of Horvath. He was a fool with his plots and his tricks, but those letters which you took from him are deemed vital to the Union, and it is my duty to retrieve them and bring them to justice. To obtain what I need by secrecy and theft is not what I would have preferred, but those letters will help liberate this realm which you have unjustly taken advantage of despite their alliance with you," came Val'inar's reply, meeting the commander's determined gaze with one of his own. "I cannot allow that to happen," snapped Bivare, who grinned with pleasure as he drew his sword. "At last the gloves come off. The elf is mine, deal with the others." Without another word, he moved in towards Val'inar quickly and opened with an elegant uppercut, which twisted from the block into a downward slash, and then a quick thrust toward the elf's chest, forcing his opponent backwards. Val'inar at first thought he would be able to help his now very much put upon friends, but he found that it took all his concentration to keep fending off the blows of his opponents. While he was undoubtedly faster, the elegance and skill with which Bivare, clearly a master of the sword, executed his attacks made it so Val'inar was unable to even find an opening with which to strike back at his opponent. It was only when he realized that he was running out of room and made a quick sidestep that he was able to strike at his enemy. The commander easily blocked these attacks, and, evidently in hoping to catch the elf unawares, he attempted to shove Val'inar off balance while they were at close quarters. If it surprised Bivare that his opponent, thanks to the bracers he wore and the enchantments he was maintaining about himself, was strong enough to reverse his own tactic, he did not show it. Val'inar was, however, unable to capitalize on his momentary advantage, as he was forced to turn and with a wave of his hand and a flash of green, send the majority of Myra's opponents sprawling as they were on the verge of surrounding her despite the spells she was weaving, spear now nearly abandoned to drive them away. This continued in the same pattern for several minutes, with the elf being unable to overcome the man's superior swordsmanship, and the man being unable to land a blow on the agile elf. Commander Bivare was finally starting to become frustrated as, whenever he had the opportunity, Val'inar would dart away just long enough to aid his two beleaguered companions, and his aid was beginning to show. Although the girl and the goblin were both clearly tiring, many of his men had fallen. As a result, he began to get much more aggressive and started to go for killing blows rather than simply incapacitating the elf. This had the desired effect, as his opponent clearly had to work harder and harder to keep up with his constant rain of attacks. Finally, as the last of his men fell to the elf's companions, he managed to find a hole in the elf's defense and struck. He knocked the elf's blade aside, and with all his might he swung for the elf's neck. To his lasting fury, his blade seemed to meet some kind of resistance just at the elf's tunic, and the blow merely knocked the elf to the ground. For a moment he thought he saw the ripple of a spell surrounding his opponent's body. Before he could think of or do anything, Bivare felt a burning sting in his sword hand. The pain was so sudden, exaggerated no doubt by the fact that he had been focusing so much on killing his prey, he failed to realize that his opponent's weapon was doing that he dropped his sword. With an almost smug smile, the elf kicked his disarmed opponent in the chest with considerable force. The blow lifted Commander Bivare off his feet, accompanied by the sound of several ribs cracking, and sent him sprawling to the floor. Recovering quickly, Bivare leapt to his feet once more and snatched at the sword of one of his fallen soldiers. He was pleased to find that, although bleeding profusely, his hand was not seriously damaged. With a shout from him, another score of soldiers came marching through the door and prepared to attack. He smiled as he saw the looks of resigned despair on his opponent's faces as the soldiers slowly advanced. Even the elf was starting to look tired, and from what little Bivare knew about magic, he was hoping that by the time he struck another killing blow, the elf would be too exhausted to weave or maintain the spell which had blocked his previous attempts. Commander Bivare's pleasure was short-lived, however, as he heard a great deal of shouting from the street and the clomp of dozens of boots running along the cobblestones. He and his men hesitated to see what was happening, and after a brief moment, a large number of soldiers bearing the livery of the Romaldan army came through the door. They were all heavily armored and bore shields. Among them was the knight commander himself, who looked furious. "What is the meaning of this, Bivare?" Knight Commander Ramar demanded. "Weaving magics without the slightest regard for safety, charging after with a clear intent to kill a citizen of Romalda and two individuals who are under the protection of House Patrol, and an all-out assault on our city's theater." Bivare bristled at this. "These three broke into the mansion belonging by treaty to the Union. They stole Union property, killed Minister Horvath, and quite a few of my soldiers who were sent to bring them to lawful justice, which we are allowed to administer as per the terms of our alignments." "We'll see if that alliance is still in effect at the end of the day," barked Ramar. "Sergeant Atir, I want those Union soldiers and magi who are unharmed to be escorted back to their mansion, by force if you have to, and keep the place surrounded. If any of them try to leave without permission from myself or the Duke, you are permitted to use deadly force. Sergeant Cluster, see to the wounded and make sure they are well treated. Once the wounded have been transported to the hospital, I want you to leave some soldiers with them, and then do a careful sweep of the streets to make sure nothing is still smoldering, and that no Union soldiers are still wandering about. You three, come with me. The Duke commands your presence at once." "We will not go quietly," defied Bivare. Ramar met his furious gaze with a mirthless smile. "Try it, please. I would like nothing better than to test your swordsmanship." "But the item they stole, I demand," began Bivare, who was cut short when a curt nod from the knight commander prompted Sergeant Atir to bring her gauntleted hand down upon the back of the irate Bivare's head, rendering him unconscious. The spirit seemed to fall within the Union soldiers with their commander, and they were led away without protest, two of them carrying their commander between them. As the soldiers went about their task, the three companions followed the knight commander through the throngs of curious citizens towards House Patrol. The sky was just starting to lighten as they neared the mansion, and it was not until then that anyone spoke. "I am sorry that we have been such a terrible trouble to you this night, Uncle," said Myra gently. "I knew our plans were dangerous, but I guess we didn't figure that the Union would be so aggressive in trying to get these letters back. I hope we did not get any innocents killed." "Do not worry your head, my dear niece. I am not angry with you. According to the reports I heard from a few civilians, it was you three that helped save a number of lives and stopped a great fire from spreading in the city," replied the knight commander, smiling for the first time since his arrival on the scene. "And if what you and your father say is true, those letters will save us from a terrible plot. While it is regrettable that such a battle occurred and so many died, and that so many innocents were put in danger, you may have just saved us from something worse." As the first rays of the sun crested the horizon, they entered the mansion of House Patrol, and seeing that bright dawn over the ocean, Val'inar smiled a weary smile. He regretted that so many lives, many of them no doubt innocent, had been lost that night, but he reflected on how many he had saved, and took comfort in his first victory over the Union. He was grateful also that he had a few hours to rest and recover from the night's exertion before the council meeting. He would need all his strength in the coming days, as there were many things that needed to be planned and discussed, but at the moment, although he knew there were dark days ahead, he had at least a glimmer of hope. All right. That is Chapter 11, The Flight. I hope you enjoyed it. In fact, I would love to hear your comments below, what you think of both my reading and the content of the chapter and the story so far. I hope you enjoyed that. Once more, please give me a like, subscribe, share it with your friends, all of that. I would love that, as well as check out my socials and my books down below. In the meantime, my name is John again. I am an author, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I'll catch you on the next one.